For centuries, long before maps ever reached this remote coastline, and long before anyone tried to document what couldn't be controlled, the Great Bear Rainforest existed as a place people spoke of with caution. It stretches across the wild Pacific coast of British Columbia, one of the oldest temperate rainforests on Earth. It's dense, it's wet, and it's alive in ways that defy simple explanation. Indigenous oral histories have always described specific regions within this vast forest where the land itself behaves differently. Places where sound seems to thin out, where your sense of direction just evaporates, and where people are warned not to linger for too long. Welcome to Nightmare Factory. These weren't meant to be ghost stories. They were instructions, survival guides for places where the forest seems to listen back. Elders would speak of valleys where skilled hunters vanished without leaving a single track. They'd tell of voices that carried much too far and came back sounding wrong, altered. They said that even speaking a name out loud could make it feel heavier than it should. These weren't considered places of evil, but of imbalance. They were areas to be treated with deep respect, not fear, because fear alone was said to attract unwanted attention. When colonial expeditions began pushing deeper into the interior during the 1800s, their written records started to quietly echo the same feeling of unease. Surveyors wrote about their compasses spinning wildly or pointing in the wrong direction, but only in isolated pockets of land. Logging crews reported entire camps falling unnaturally silent for hours at a time, even in the middle of the day. Tools would vanish overnight, only to reappear later, carefully arranged at the edge of a clearing, placed with intention, not just scattered. Several journals from that era describe men hearing familiar voices calling to them from deeper in the woods. Voices that belonged to people who weren't there, or in some cases, people who were no longer alive. The men who chose to follow those voices were often never seen again. When search parties were sent to find them, the rescuers themselves reported experiencing intense nausea, sudden disorientation, and a crushing sense of pressure that felt like it was physically pushing them back, forcing them to retreat. The official explanations always cited the difficult terrain, unpredictable wildlife, or harsh weather. But privately, in the margins of their notes, many mentioned the same unsettling detail: the silence. A sudden, complete absence of all sound that felt less like nature and more like you were being watched. By the early 20th century, strange rumors of an unmarked concrete structure started to circulate among the forestry workers and local communities. They described an overgrown bunker, half buried under moss and thick root systems. That never appeared on any official map. Some guessed it was a forgotten wartime installation. Others thought it might be an abandoned research site from some secret project. To this day, no official documentation has ever confirmed its construction or its purpose. The few people who claim to have gone inside describe strange symbols carved deep into the concrete walls. It wasn't graffiti, and it wasn't any known language. They were geometric shapes, repeated with slight variations, etched deliberately and with great force. Several of the workers who reported finding the structure later refused to ever go back into the forest. One man quit his job on the spot, stating that he believed the bunker wasn't built to keep something in, but to acknowledge something that was already there. His bizarre report was dismissed as nonsense and quietly filed away in an archive, forgotten. Throughout the mid-20th century, the number of disappearances in the Great Bear Rainforest began to rise, and they followed a pattern that unsettled even the most experienced investigators. The people who went missing were often incredibly skilled outdoorsmen. They were hunters, loggers, and field researchers, people who knew the wilderness inside and out and were experts in survival. In many of these cases, their camps were found completely intact. Food was left uneaten, and all their expensive gear was untouched. There were never any signs of a struggle, no animal tracks, nothing. Search and rescue teams started documenting recurring symptoms among their own volunteers. They reported splitting headaches, overwhelming anxiety, and a profound sense of disorientation, even on familiar trails. Several separate reports mention rescuers hearing footsteps perfectly matching their own pace, right behind them, while they knew they were walking completely alone. Others described their radios picking up faint breathing or whispered sounds, even on inactive channels. But these disturbing details rarely made it into the final public reports. They existed in the margins, in handwritten notes, and in hushed conversations that were never officially recorded. They were the details that were too strange to explain, but too consistent to ignore. By the late 1990s, the forest's strange reputation began attracting a new kind of visitor: paranormal investigators and researchers who specialized in unexplained phenomena. They arrived with sensitive equipment, hoping to capture proof of what was happening. Their audio recordings picked up disembodied voices with no visible source. Video footage captured shadowy figures moving at the edge of the frame, figures that wouldn't register clearly on playback. A common problem was that batteries would drain with incredible speed in most areas of the forest. Yet in certain specific locations, their cameras would operate for far longer than they ever should have, well beyond their expected limits. The investigators started to notice that the forest seemed to respond differently depending on the behavior of the people within it. Loud, boisterous groups would experience escalating feelings of unease and dread. Overly confident groups would report becoming hopelessly lost and disoriented. And skeptical groups who came looking to debunk the stories often experienced nothing at all, until a sudden, overwhelming event would force their immediate withdrawal. One investigator described the forest as being reactive rather than aggressive. Another said it felt less like being haunted and more like being evaluated. Over time, a cohesive theory began to emerge among those who studied the region closely. The Great Bear Rainforest wasn't haunted in the traditional sense. There didn't seem to be any single spirit, no identifiable entity, and no consistent apparitions. Instead, the phenomena appeared to be environmental, interactive, and highly selective. The forest didn't pursue people. It waited. It seemed to reflect whatever energy or intention was brought into it. Those who entered seeking to dominate it or to demand answers often reported the most aggressive escalations. But those who entered quietly with respect sometimes left with experiences they struggled to articulate, profound but inexplicable. Oddly, cameras and equipment were often recovered, even when the people who owned them were not. Devices left behind would sometimes continue recording long after their batteries should have died, capturing subtle movements, strange sounds, and long periods of that profound, watchful silence. The footage never explained what was happening. It only confirmed that something was responding. Scientists have tried to explain all of this away. They've proposed theories ranging from powerful electromagnetic anomalies to undiscovered underground mineral deposits that could affect neurological function. Psychologists point to the effects of deep isolation, the power of suggestion, and stress-induced hallucinations. But none of these theories can fully account for the sheer consistency of the reports across so many generations and different cultures. None of them explain the symbols in the bunker. None of them explain the bunker itself. And none of them explain why the forest seems to allow witnesses, but never any closure. When asked directly about these scientific interpretations, the indigenous elders don't argue or disagree. They simply say that the forest is behaving the way it always has, that modern people have just forgotten how to listen. Today, the Great Bear Rainforest remains officially accessible to the public. There are no special warnings posted, nothing beyond the standard advisories for any wilderness area. There's no official mention of anomalous zones, and no acknowledgement of the disappearances beyond their classification as unresolved cold cases. Yet the locals still avoid certain valleys. Hikers still find their voices dropping to a whisper without any conscious reason. And children are still taught not to follow sounds that seem to know their name. On the surface, the forest stands unchanged. It is ancient, patient, and impossibly vast. Whatever lies beneath that surface does not announce itself. It doesn't have to. It appears to respond only when it is noticed. And so, the most unsettling truth remains completely unresolved. The Great Bear Rainforest doesn't just contain stories of the unexplained, it actively participates in them. Thanks for watching Nightmare Factory. See you back down the rabbit hole soon.